the ability to do it even when you're afraid is the mark of maturity.
Yeah.
And so I think that whatever it is that life calls on us to do, I think that we've got to step into it. And when we do, assuming we prepare and all that, but when we step into it, those feelings disappear.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Michael Hyatt.
And I'm Megan Hyatt Miller.
And you're listening to The Double Win Show. We believe that you can both win at work and succeed at life. That's the double win.
Well, today we're having a great conversation with our friend Grant Baldwin, who is a nationally recognized speaker, podcaster, and author, and the founder of the Speaker Lab, which helps people start and build speaking businesses. Guys, get this. He has spoken to over 500,000 people in 47 states over the last 13 years. He's also the author of The Successful Speaker, 5 Steps for Booking Gigs, Getting Paid, and Building Your Platform. And he's the host of the Speaker Lab podcast. He's been featured in Forbes, Inc., Entrepreneur, and the Huffington Post. And he's an avid pilot. I'm laughing because he's also a pool enthusiast. I don't really know what that means, but I'm excited to find out. And he's a cyclist. He lives here in Nashville, Tennessee with his wife, Sheila, and their 3 daughters. And he strives to live his life, get this, like Chuck Norris.
Without further ado, here's our conversation with Grant. Grant, welcome to the show.
It's an honor to be here. And we're doing it in person too. We were just talking about how this is way more enjoyable.
So much more fun.
The virtual world that we've all been living
in.
Okay, let's start with the most important question.
Okay.
Why Chuck Norris?
I'm dying to know this answer. Okay. I do not know the answer, and I'm like on the edge.
I feel like this is going to be a really disappointing answer. So when I was speaking full time, I was doing 60, 70 gigs a year and was doing a lot in the education space and doing a lot with high school students and colleges, a lot with teachers and educators. And so one of the things I noticed when I was speaking is I had this like pre-prepped intro that you wanted them to read. And sometimes people would kind of get up there and wing it. And they're like, no, just read it exactly as it's written.
Follow the script.
And so like when the whoever's speaking up there reading through the intro and then you follow, you want whatever the last thing is that they are going to say to lead well into you. So it's not just like, please welcome, it's just like, so one of the things I started playing with is I put this line in there of yada, yada, bio, but the last line was, but ultimately he wants to grow up to be like Chuck Norris. And that's not actually true, but it always got a good reaction. I got a great reaction from it, and it caused people to laugh. Please welcome Grant. You come up as people are already kind of in that state of mind. They're laughing, they're having a good time. So I know very little to nothing about Chuck Norris. I have no desire to actually be like him, but it worked as a line that worked well to start to build some type of connection and resonance with that.
Well, it worked with us.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So congratulations.
I know.
It's an open loop there.
There has to be a story here. Like,
I've never
is it
met
the
Chuck
Bowflex? Like, what is
it? There is nothing there. It's
the
a very anticlimactic story.
You need to make up a great story about that.
I need to come up with something a little stronger there.
So we've known each other for, I don't know, maybe a decade.
Yeah.
Wow. And we're not great friends, but I'd like to be.
You're kind of mediocre friends. Is that what you mean?
So, all right. So I was explaining this the other day to my daughters. I have all girls, as you know.
Oh,
like you,
wow.
right?
I didn't know
and
that.
So we were talking, 3 girls.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we were talking about how I was referring to someone. I said, oh, I have this friend, or I have this this bud, or I have this pal, or I have this. And they were like, what's the categories? Like, what's the
exactly.
Right? What is this person versus that? I have this buddy, like, but what is a buddy and how is that different than a friend? So sorry to interrupt there, but
so where would I fit into your schema?
Oh, wow. This is a lot of pressure. Okay.
Michael's a friend. Yeah. I think you're friend. No, I'm going to go buddy category.
Okay.
He's a buddy. Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
which one's better?
I think a buddy.
Okay.
Yeah. Now you're going to put me on the spot. I got to analyze it.
I like that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're going fishing this fall together.
I know.
And so I recently went flying with you. And so, this really does lead into the double win because I feel like you're living it. You've created a work-life balance that few people enjoy. And I suspect that was very intentional in terms of the way you built your business. Was there ever a story where you didn't have that, where you were working like way too much and you just said, something's got to change?
Yeah, very much so. And so I'll give you kind of 2 different stories. One was, if we go way back in time, in high school, I was really involved in my local church. My youth pastor had a big impact on my life. And I was like, I want to do that. Like that seems really fulfilling, gratifying, rewarding. And so I went to Bible college. That was the kind of the path that I was on. and became a youth pastor. And there were parts of it I liked, parts of it I didn't like. But one thing I really enjoyed was speaking, and felt like I was decent at it, wanted to do more of it, but just didn't know, like, but how do you book gigs, and how does this, how much you charge, what do you speak about, who hires speakers, how does this work? And so as a youth pastor for a couple of years, and part of the nature of being in ministry is like you're always on, and
Yeah.
it's not like you clock in and you clock out, and if someone needs something, or you're always kind of accessible. And so I remember at one point, my wife and I, we'd been married for just a couple of years. I came home, she's kind of in tears, and she's just like, I don't feel like I have a husband, I feel like I have a roommate. And
Ooh.
I just
Mm.
felt exhausted and mentally tired. And I think for so long you look to this career, and it could be anything, of just like, oh, this is the thing that I want to do, and then you get into it and you're like, this isn't the thing that I thought it was. From the outside
Yeah.
looking in, I thought it was going to be amazing. I got into it, and it wasn't necessarily the case. And so I think that was a big thing that just caused me to think about, like, okay, what is it that I really want to do in life? And so speaking was a thing that I kept coming back to. And so the second part of that was that I eventually got into speaking and became a full-time speaker, was traveling all over. And speaking is a high-paying manual labor job, in that you get paid really well to stand on stage and run your mouth. But the nature of it is you got to get on a plane, you got to leave your
Right.
family, you got to go somewhere to
Yep.
do the thing. It's like a surgeon. Surgeon makes really good money to do what they do, but you got to show up and do surgery. You have a job. You don't necessarily have a business. And so I remember I was at a point where you can only do so many gigs in a year. You can't do 1,000 gigs. You want to go home. You want to see your family. You want them to recognize you. And so eventually got to a point where I felt tired. I kind of felt worn out. I was like, well, now what? What do you do from here? You kind of reach the pinnacle, the peak, so to speak. And I remember talking with a friend, kind of mentor, and he said, you have to regularly find things where the challenge exceeds the skill set, where the challenge
Mm.
exceeds the skill set. Meaning when you first start doing something, you feel way over your head. The first time you speak, you just feel like, I have no idea what I'm doing. But over time, as it flips and the skill set exceeds the challenge, and you feel bored, and you kind of feel like you're going through the motions. And
That's
like, I'm kind of on autopilot. This is,
Mhm.
this isn't as exciting or thrilling as it once was. And so the point being of just like, is this the kind of life that I want to have? And if I continue down this on the trajectory it is this play out in the way that is satisfying or gratifying
Hmm.
to me? And so from that standpoint, it's going like, no, I want to, have a business that's not dependent on me. It's not dependent on me getting on a plane or going somewhere. And so very much like in terms of business, we've been very intentional. Like, what do we want this to look like? Like, we all get to design the rules of the game in a way that makes sense to us. And so what do we want that to look like in our family and our marriage? The same
Mhm.
sort of way of in terms of travel or homeschooling or moving to Nashville several years ago when we had no reason to, of saying like, no, this is what we want to look like.
Mm.
And we're in control of that, just like anybody and everybody else is. So making hard decisions in order to have the type of intentional life that you want to have.
Yeah, that's amazing. As I was thinking about kind of what you do in this world of speaking and so forth, if someone were to ask me, what are the top jobs that would make it really hard to have the double win? I mean, speaking would be at the top of the list. ER doc would be up
Yep.
there. Politician would be up there. I mean, I think there are certain industries or jobs that you can have or businesses you could build that would be more difficult than others. So I'm so curious, how do you think about speaking both for yourself and the people that you train in a way that ultimately enables you to have the kind of freedom to live in alignment with your values, which I
Yeah.
feel like is kind of what you're saying,
Yeah.
behind what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think even if you were a full-time speaker, I think
Yeah.
again one of the things is whatever you do as an entrepreneur, again you get to design what you
Yeah.
want it to look like and what makes sense for you. So
Right.
we all know speakers who are killing it, who do 100 gigs a year, and those who on the other end of the spectrum do 10 gigs a year. It's not that one is better or worse than the other. It's just you got to decide what
Mhm.
makes the most sense for you, and what may make sense for you may not make sense for me, and what the season of life is that
True.
you're
Yes.
in may be different. So when we had young kids, it's different than when we have teenagers, versus it's different when you're an empty nester. And so what does all these factors combine to look like in a way that makes the most sense for you? And so I think I did have some reservation about like, boy, the more you're traveling, the more you're just gone, the
Yeah.
more you're missing things. But also it meant that I was home a significant amount. So if I was going to compare or contrast being on the road all the time relative to someone who just had a 9 to 5 gig and was commuting to the office every day,
Yeah.
I would have made the argument that I was probably seeing my family significantly more.
Interesting.
Because it's also
That
can
is
be
interesting.
like
Yeah.
like speaking can be very cyclical and cycle and seasonal. And so you may have seasons where you're busy, you're
Mhm.
gone a lot, but then you may have like December, there's just not a lot of gigs that are happening. And so you
Mhm.
may be home for week after week after week.
Yeah.
Eventually my wife's going like, do you have anything you can go do?
Is your career
somewhere?
over?
Off you go, please.
Yeah.
And so then you might have a stretch where you're just home like all day, every day for
Yeah.
week and week and week. Which is another kind of a related topic of we've homeschooled our girls for several years. And so part of the intentionality behind that was just being together as a
Yeah.
family a lot. And so I work from the home. My wife homeschools our girls. And so on one hand, it's like, oh, this is awesome. We're all together all
Yeah.
the time. And on the other hand, you're like, oh, yeah, but we're all together all the time. You know, like we love
You
each
can
other.
have
but-
too much of the double win.
Absolutely. Like you need a little bit of breathing room there. But again, the point being is like saying, hey, we want to value our time together. We want to
Mhm.
value the type of what the business looks like and what my responsibilities are as a part of that. And so how do, again, we design in a way that makes sense to say, no, you can have your cake and eat it too, which again, I know is
Mhm.
ultimately what the
Yeah.
double win is all
And
about.
I like that that's a creative way that you're thinking about it. It doesn't have to necessarily conform to, instead of working a 60-hour week, your goal is to
Yeah.
work a 40-hour week and be done every day at 5. Like it can have ebbs and flows in it when these more unconventional industries or jobs. And I think that's helpful for people to hear because sometimes people think, well, if only I was in
Yeah.
a regular job, then I could have the double win. And it actually, with some creativity, it can work.
Well, let me give you
almost
some
anywhere.
other like practical examples specifically with speaking. So, a mutual friend of all of ours that I know has been on the podcast, John Acuff.
Mhm.
Yes.
I know like he doesn't do gigs in July. And so
Yeah.
he just says like, I'm traveling with Jenny. We're going to go do this thing. And like, I just don't do gigs in July. Like he gets to choose that, someone else may be like, but you can't do that. What if you get an invite? It's like, yeah, he turns down gigs in July because he's put those parameters in place.
Yep.
Right. I have another friend who they don't do gigs on the weekend because they're like, my kids are home. I don't want to, I'm just not
Yeah.
going to, if it's a Saturday, Sunday, if it requires me to travel on a Sunday,
Yep.
like I can leave Monday morning to get to your gig. And so if that, logistically works out, great. Otherwise, I won't be there.
Mhm.
Other people who say, I do gigs in this radius. And if it's outside of that
Mhm.
radius, whatever that radius
Yeah.
may be,
Geographically speaking.
yeah, geographically, like I won't, I can't do it. I'm sorry. But
Yeah.
again, like you get to decide. You
That's
can't be
really
like,
helpful.
it can't be like this open-ended thing of like, I'll do anything for anybody, anywhere. No, like you get to choose what it
Yeah.
looks like for you. So
Yep.
don't act like you're, a victim and saying like, well, in order to be a speaker, in order to be an entrepreneur, in order to fill in the blank, I have to do it this way. No, you absolutely do not.
That's where I think also constraints are our friends.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because, the most creative people I've found are the people that embrace constraints and not resent them.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And so are there some non-negotiables for you at this season in your life when it comes to work?
Yeah, there are a couple things that we're really intentional about. Several things I've learned from watching you guys is that you want to be cautious and making sure that the thing is not overly dependent on one individual. And so, so in my case, there's a lot of things I don't do. And so there's a lot of like social media things I don't do, or there's a lot of webinars I don't do. Even within the podcast, I'm probably doing 50% of the interviews now. And we have other team members who are doing other parts of it. And so I never want to get to a point where again, it's just way too dependent on like, it's got to be Grant,
Yeah.
just like, well, then again, you kind of painted yourself into a corner and created like a
Mhm.
job, and you're this dancing monkey that has to constantly be able to perform, right? Regardless of what you want to do with the business or anything. Like, I just don't want to be in that spot necessarily. So a couple things related to that. I think like just some basic constraints on just a day in and day out of how I spend my time or meetings or when I'm done, and I'm not doing meetings at this time and it's not going to be interrupting my family.
Mhm.
When I'm on vacation, like I'm away from Slack and I'm away from email and we don't do calls. And so,
Good for you.
and the same
Yeah.
thing that we enforce for the rest of the team. So it's not like there's a set of rules for Grant and then there's a different set of rules for everyone else. So we've had team members who would say, Grant will be more annoyed if you're on vacation and check Slack. You know,
Yeah.
if someone checks in, like, hey,
It's like a little test.
What are you doing? You're not supposed to be here. Get out. Like, I like you, but I don't want you here right now.
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
talk to you on Monday. And so like putting those parameters on people of saying, no, like this, if we're going to run a marathon, if we're going to do this for the long haul, then we got to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves and that we do have those constraints and parameters on ourselves.
Yeah, that's really good.
How does the airplane fit into all this? You're one of the few friends I have. I have a few friends that have airplanes.
Yeah.
But I think for the average person listening to this, that sounds like an enormous luxury.
Mm-hmm.
But what was your thinking about it? I mean, because I suspect that there was probably the business argument.
Yeah.
But then there's the real argument. which is you just wanted to learn how to fly.
Yeah. Yeah. So the nutshell was I had always kind of been intrigued by it, and you're always kind of wondering like, what are they doing up there? What's going on? How does this work? And I'd always kind of been on my radar and just kind of more of a bucket list type deal. Like it'd be really cool to know how to fly a plane. Like no, I don't want to be a commercial pilot or anything. I just thought it'd be kind of interesting. And so I was at a dinner a couple of years ago with some of our team, and our CFO had just started taking flying lessons. And so he was kind of telling me about it. I was like, wait a second, you can just take flying lessons? Like that's a thing? Like I didn't know that was a thing. Like you're a normal dude. Like, well, if you can do it, I can do it. And so literally after that, I talked to, there's a neighbor of mine who's a pilot. I reached out to him like, okay, how does this work? How to take flying lessons or go to school? Like, I don't know how this works. And what else is involved in this? And so, signed up for what's called a discovery flight, where they take you up, kind of show you some stuff similar to what we did, and kind of let you try some things and some basic maneuvers, and like, hey, you want to take lessons? Here's how this works, And so it's like, I think I want to do this. And so for the next about 9 months or so, was doing multiple lessons a week, learning to fly. And honestly, I got super discouraged towards the end because we were really, really close to the finish line there. And I think where I got really discouraged was learning to fly is incredibly hard. They don't just pass out a license to anyone, which is a good thing,
good to know.
right? But as we were getting closer there, I was just having to put so much work and study and prep into this. And I was just kind of like, why am I doing this? Because I'm not trying to go to the airline. I'm not trying to, there was no plan to buy a plane or anything. So you're just kind of like, all of a sudden there's no goal. You're running this thing and there's no like defined finish line. And I remember I reached out to a friend of mine who's a pilot, and I was just like, I want to quit right now. Can you talk me off the ledge? And he's just like, yes, you absolutely have to finish this. You have to do it. You'll kick yourself if you don't. And so finished it, got the license. And even then, like there was really no plans to buy a plane. I was just renting the one through the school where I took lessons. And then eventually I was talking to another mutual friend, about who had a plane, and he was kind of explaining it to me what it's like to own a plane. And so kind of got the wheels spinning on that, kind of talked to my wife about that. And so yeah, about a little over a year ago or so, we got a plane, and it's been awesome from like a personal standpoint, from a satisfaction, fulfillment standpoint, from a business standpoint. We were talking a little bit before we started recording. We're a virtual company all over the place. And so our marketing team was having an in-person meeting in Atlanta yesterday. And I said, I'll be there. So I flew down yesterday afternoon, an hour flight, had dinner with them for a few hours. I was like, all right, I got to go. I'm back to the airport, flew home, was in bed by 9. It was great.
Security to go through.
No. You hop in your plane and you take off.
It's amazing that you were able to pick up that F-16 at such a bargain basement price.
Yes. Yeah. I was on sale, cashed in some Chase Ultimate Reward points. That was great.
I know there are going to be some people, because there's something about airplanes.
They're very polarizing sometimes.
Well, that a lot of guys, I don't know about women, but a lot of guys like I've got one of my clients, his name's Sean Walsh, who just retired from the Air Force, and he was an F-16 pilot. Mm-hmm. So he started from zero on social media 2 months ago. And now he has on TikTok, I think, or Instagram, he has 150,000 followers.
Oh my gosh.
And all he talks about is sort of leadership lessons from a fighter pilot.
Yeah.
Oh.
And I mean, he just said people are fascinated by this stuff.
I thought what you were going to say is, I know we're going to get some hate mail about, this is out of reach for most people or something.
Well, it is. But whatever. Yeah. So, but the question I have is some people are asking this question, what kind of plane do you have?
Yeah.
I've been up in it recently. I'm going to tell about that trip in a second because it was so fun, but it's a beautiful plane.
Yeah, so it's a Cirrus SR22 turbo, which means nothing to 99% of people,
means,
and that is fine.
Impressive.
But this is a lovely plane. Yeah, so it seats 5 people, and so most of the time it's me and maybe a co-pilot. Sometimes it's the family, and so we can have. You wouldn't necessarily want to put 3 adults in the back there. Weight and balance becomes a real issue. But for our 3 teenage girls, we can wedge them in the back there for about a 2-hour flight somewhere. But it just, I had this friend who said, like, it's like having a time machine, and what it opens up and creates is amazing, So, being able to, what would be a 7-8 hour drive down to Florida from here, is a 2-hour flight. Or my wife and I went to Chicago a couple weekends ago, and it was again like an hour and a half, hour 45 flight. And so just to have the freedom, the flexibility, you don't have to go through security, you don't have to check bags, you get in the plane and you go, and you get
That
to
sounds
experience that.
awesome.
It was really fun.
I did. So we flew from Nashville to Knoxville.
Yep.
And so by car, that would have been what, 3 hours?
Yeah,
Three and a
three and a half.
3.5?
Yeah.
And we were there in, how many?
Yeah, 45 minutes or so.
45
man,
minutes.
That's amazing.
And all we did was we went down there to eat at the Lonesome Dove
Yeah.
restaurant, which is one of my favorite restaurants, Wild Game, amazing. So we had dinner and we came back. But the cool thing was on the way back, Grant let me fly it. And now I wasn't doing,
Now, if I'd really
loop-de-loops.
known that, I would have been extra scared.
His barrel rolls were spot on.
Okay,
You'd have
good.
been impressed. He
Hey,
watched some YouTube
let's make
videos. He was
sure
ready
we
to
beef
go.
up the life insurance policy a
You
little
know,
bit more.
To tell you the truth, it felt like I was on a video game.
Yeah.
Because you're
Ah.
looking at a screen more than you're looking outside.
Mhm.
And you're looking at a screen and it's telling you everything you need to know.
Amazing.
And so I did that for probably about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And then we have a lake house not too far from Knoxville. So we flew over there and we picked up my wife, Gail. And then we flew around the lake house
Oh.
several times. So we saw it from the air. And the rest of the family was there because we were going to be there that weekend.
Uh-huh.
And they're out on the dock waving up at
Uh-huh.
us. And, we're signaling to them that we're up there. And they loved that. We loved that. I tried to get your mother to fly, but
She had nothing to do with it.
she didn't want to
She
do it.
enjoyed the experience.
Yeah.
She enjoyed the experience.
Yeah. Because I also get like it's a daunting thing and it's kind of an
Mhm.
intimidating thing, because there's a lot of friends who are like, I really like you, but I'm not getting in a plane with you.
Yeah.
It's like what? Even like my wife and girls still get nervous, and I think some of it is when you know someone prior to becoming a pilot. If
Uh-huh.
you know someone that like they've always been a pilot, I don't know any different.
Yeah.
They're a commercial pilot, but when you know someone like you didn't used to be a pilot and now you are.
Are they like holding
Can I
your driving
trust
record
you?
against
Yeah.
you, kind of?
I don't know about that. I think it's just it's a big deal,
Yeah,
and
it's a big deal.
I've always found like people are really nervous about the idea of it. And then you get
Yeah.
up there and you realize like, oh, like this is I feel pretty safe and this
Yeah.
is not as big a deal as I would have thought it would have been.
Mhm.
And it's all intimidating up front. And then all of a sudden you start coming back to earth and you're like, okay, we're getting closer and we're going pretty fast. Are you sure, we're good with this? But it's a cool experience. And I think also, one thing we talked about was from like a relationship and a networking experience. It's one thing if you and I go to coffee or something or go grab
Right.
lunch. It's something else of like, oh, we went flying. That was really
Yeah, it's
cool,
very singular.
and it's a very
Mhm.
just unique,
Yeah.
memorable type of experience that not a lot of people can provide to someone else.
Well,
Yeah.
tell me if I'm wrong on this, but statistically speaking, you have a much higher chance of being in a car wreck than an airplane wreck.
yeah, so there's different categories of that, and so
He's
commercial.
No fender benders
He's
when
like,
it comes.
actually, not really,
Uh,
Michael.
well, there's parts of it that are very much true. Like actually, commercial flying is way safer than
Yeah.
driving. And
Mhm.
so what they've always said is like general aviation, what we're talking about here, kind of a smaller plane, is more similar to like motorcycles. And so they
I wish I'd known that.
well, hang on. However, now that's overall general aviation. So Cirrus, the manufacturer of the plane that we fly, one of the things that they are known for is being one of the safest planes out there. And so a lot of that's the technology. But the big thing that we talked about was there's a parachute built into the plane itself.
What?
Which sounds like, wait a second,
Crazy.
you mean like for the person? No, not for the people, for the plane itself. There's literally
Oh.
a ballistic rocket propelled a parachute in the back of the plane that if you pull this handle, it shoots a parachute out the back. And so they have documented hundreds and hundreds of lives that have been saved from the parachute. And so
Wow.
that was a deal breaker for my wife. Was I kind of explained the idea of us getting a plane. She's like, absolutely not. That's ridiculous. And I said, well, this one has a parachute. And she's like, okay, maybe. And so then I was like, well, what about this one? She's like, does it have a parachute? I was like, no, but she's like, oh, don't want to hear about it. It's got to have a parachute or nothing. And so there's also just that from like a safety perspective,
Yeah.
that worst case scenario, if I pass out, if something happens to me,
Mhm.
I know that my wife says, all I got to do is pull this handle and there's a good chance that we'll be okay. So that carries a lot of weight as well.
Well, I'm not quite sure what this has to do with the double win, except that I'm just
Except that it's
absolutely
awesome.
fascinated by
Well,
it.
here's part of it is I think it kind of speaks to, again, kind of designing the kind of life that you want to have.
Yeah.
There's no practical reason that I need an airplane. There's no reason that I needed to get my pilot's license. On one hand, it's just kind of cool.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it's just like, yeah, but I get to experience life in a different type of way that most people wouldn't. And so again, going back to, what's the point of becoming a speaker? Because I just thought this is the kind of life that I want to have. What's the point of moving to Nashville 10 years ago when I wasn't moving for a job? We didn't have any family here. We didn't have any friends here. There's no reason on paper to move. Everybody's questioning, wait a second, why are you going there? What is this about? It's like, we just think it'd be a cool place to be, and why did we homeschool our girls years ago before a pandemic, forced a lot of people into it? It's like, no, this is the kind of life that we want to live. And so same thing with a plane. Like, is there any practical need for it? No, like we can survive just fine without it. But from a life design standpoint, it's been a huge, huge win.
Well, the other thing that I think is a huge win about it is you're essentially buying back your time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Like, and I think for many people, you get to a certain level of income, and more income is not going to solve any problem, but more time would solve problems.
Yeah.
And so when you can fly somewhere faster than you could drive, and I've literally never met anybody that says, I want to spend more time actually traveling.
Yeah.
No, you travel to get there.
Yeah.
But it's the getting there is what's important. So the fact that you have a plane allows you to spend more time with your family. I know you take your family up quite a bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really cool.
So I'm hearing this thread in your story about, living in congruence with your values, about personal freedom, about life design. I mean, these are big concepts that feel like they're innate to you, but I'm imagining our listeners, and they probably don't feel innate to everybody listening today. I mean, they're probably like, wow, who's this guy? So where does that come from for you? Like, where you thought to yourself, I can design my life in a way that works for my family, that works with the values that I had. I mean, was there something that happened when you were a kid?
It's not a natural thought.
It's not a natural thought. I think most of us think that things, like, we don't kind of come into life with a growth mindset of, things are flexible. We kind of come in with like, this is how it works.
Yeah.
Maybe what we saw our parents do or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So my, in my childhood and teen years, my dad was an entrepreneur, and so he worked from home, so he had some flexibility there.
He
and
worked from home, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was
pre-internet.
Yeah, way back when. And so I do remember seing that and seeing like, okay, he could stop what he was doing and hang out with us or interact with us or whatever that may be. But I also, I don't know if there was any like one moment or instance as much as, again, like, well, we all get to design this, just because. I'll give you one example. Would be like when we started, my wife started homeschooling our girls. I remember one time they were real little. They came in and they said, hey, if we do tomorrow's work today, does that mean we can play more tomorrow? I was like, yeah, because that's the way it is for all of us, right? And it shouldn't just be that we, you work 8 to 5 or 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and that's the way it is for life, because that's the way it's been done for decades and generations. It's like, no, like you can design the things in a way that makes sense for you. And again, what may make sense for you may not make sense for someone else. So we may look at someone else's life of, hey, here's a family who travels around the world all the time, and this is the way that they choose to live life, or this family that chooses to live out of an RV, or this family that chooses to live off the grid, or whatever that may look like. That makes sense to them. And it's also realizing like you're not making a permanent decision. So I remember, for example,
good point.
Whenever we moved to Nashville, we had a lot of well-meaning family and friends who were like, have you thought this through? Like, what happens what happens if you get there and you don't like it?
Yeah.
And I remember telling someone like, well, we'll just move back.
Yeah.
Like it's an ordeal.
You're not like
Go to Mars.
Yeah, like
or
it's not like
body parts
you're
or
not making
anything.
this permanent decision, And so you get a choice. Let's say we buy the plane and we have it for a little while and we don't like it. Well, then we sell it and you just move on with life. And again, there's like transactional costs associated with these things, but it's not like any of these things are permanent decisions. So one of the things I would say would be, yes, we can talk about it as if it is, these are like normal, common things. And part of it may just be like, we don't know any other way to live. But also some of this is, I think, is like incremental steps of bravery, where if we go back for any of our lives, years and years and years, like we have that kind of life that we have now. And so it was like making micro steps along the way of, why do we live here? Or why do we choose to school kids this way? Or why do we work in this way instead of that way? And it doesn't mean, again, like you make this conscious decision on a Friday afternoon and then Monday morning, it's like, okay, it all worked out. But saying like, okay, if that's the kind of life that I want to live, and this is where I'm at today, just like on a map, what's the best possible way to get from point A to point B? And what are the steps I need to start taking in order to move that toward that direction?
So how do you get the courage, those little kind of micro courage moments? Like when you're thinking about something like maybe being a pilot, for example, how do you convince yourself to do that?
So I think there's a couple ways to look at it. There's, one of them is going to be the regret side of things. What are the things that you did that you wish you hadn't done? And what are the things you didn't do that you wish you had tried? And so I felt like through the lens of like entrepreneurship, it was one of those things of going, okay, if I if I start this speaking business, what if it doesn't work? It's like, well, I can live with it not working, but I don't want to get to the end of life and be like, I think I could have made that work, but I'll never know because I didn't try. And the same thing was true with like being a pilot, of going like, maybe I do that discovery flight. Maybe I do a couple lessons and decide, this isn't for me. And that's fine. I can live with that. But what I don't want to live with is going like, I just didn't even try. Because I was scared, or I was worried, or I was anxious, or cost, or whatever. Like, these are all real things. So I don't want to just like downplay them or minimize them. They're absolutely things that you got to factor in and consider. But at the end of the day, like, I want to look back and be like, I lived life really, really great. So let me give you a quick story. Last year, we do this houseboat trip with a couple buddies, Brian
We
Harris,
have
and
heard
several
about
guys.
this
We've heard about
houseboat
it.
It's a
trip.
popular
It's epic.
houseboat trip.
Yeah.
We've done 9 years of this houseboat trip.
amazing.
And so we have 4 guys that go every year, and then we have 2 new guys that come every year, and just to get to know some other guys. And so last year, one of the new guys that came, like 2 or 3 days before the houseboat, his mom passed away, like just suddenly out of the blue. And so we're talking to him before the houseboat of just like, hey man, if you're not able to come, totally fine. If you got to deal with, funeral preparation, yada, 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 like totally get it. They're like, this is a major, major deal. And so I remember he's like, no, I want to be there. I've been looking for this. I'm coming. He comes, and we were kind of talking about it. I'm like, man, your mom literally died a couple of days ago. How you doing? And he's like, honestly, like I'm doing really, really well. And he said, people oftentimes talk about regrets of like, oh, if I could just hug my mom one more time, if I could tell her I love her one more time. He's like, I did those things. I hugged her. I loved her. I told her I love her. Like, we just went on a trip with her, And so I feel like that oftentimes with my own life, that if something were to happen to me, I don't want to look back and be like, man, all these things that I left undone or unsaid or unaccomplished. It's like, no, I've had a really, really great life. And I want to continue that life. But I also have been intentional to say like, no, this is a good life. I got one shot at this thing.
Yeah.
And so I want to make sure that like I lived it well, and I was satisfied with what I did.
That's really cool.
What does your typical week look like now, and your typical day?
Yeah. So most mornings I'll start with some type of exercise. And so a lot of times I'm getting up at like 4:45 to go to the gym at 5:30, either a couple days a week. I lift with our mutual friend, Brian Harris. And we lift heavy things and pretend like we're strong. A couple days a week.
Are you a CrossFitter?
No, that's ridiculous. So I'm a pilot. And so I have to tell people I'm a pilot in the same way that a CrossFitter has to tell people that they're a CrossFitter.
Yeah.
So I'm doing something that I feel like obligated to let everyone know, just to work it in the conversation.
Okay, good.
So similar. So we'll work out a couple days a week. Play pickleball quite a bit. Yeah. Have you guys gotten into that?
No, but
we want to.
A bunch of my sisters have.
Okay.
And I was just talking with my husband the other day. We were on a walk, and I was like, babe, we have got to do pickleball.
It's a lot of fun.
I had a friend yesterday.
I mean, we're over 40, so I feel like
You're
it's
in.
obligatory
Come on
at this
now,
point.
let's go.
I had a friend yesterday. He was talking about pickleball. And he said, pickleball has made tennis more accessible to more people. It's like an improvement on tennis.
Yes.
And he said, what we need is pickle golf, because 18 holes is too long.
It's a commitment.
Yeah.
He said, we need 12 holes. And he said, we just need to take the existing golf courses and divide them into 3, 18. So you could play this 6 or this 6, and then you're done.
Yeah.
I love that idea.
That's intriguing.
There you go. That's
Pickle
our next
golf.
business.
Yeah. So either lifting with Brian or pickleball, walk the dog a couple days a week. And so something to get the blood pumping in the morning there. And a lot of times I'm at my desk by 7:38 at home, and I'm ready to get going. Like I genuinely enjoy what it is that I do. So it's nothing that you're like, you're dreading or like, this is awful. This is miserable. Like, well, if you're living that kind of life, again, you're the one that can do something about it, So you need to change something about that setting or the environment or whatever it may be. So a lot of times I'm at my desk, 7:38, and getting after it. And so, like I said, because my wife homeschools the girls, like when they start to make their rounds, and then I want to go out and see them, hang out with them for a few. But most days I'm working, 3, 4, 5 o'clock or so. And it kind of depends. Normally, like, you start the beginning of the week working till 4 or 5, and then as the week goes, it kind of trickles down, and maybe by Friday afternoon, it's kind of a half day of that. But I try to have some, freedom, flexibility there. A lot of times in the evening, hanging out with the family, doing something with them. And so, I genuinely really, really enjoy my life, and I enjoy the life that I get to live, and the people I get to live with and get to do life with.
Okay, so I feel like we have to ask you some questions about speaking.
Yeah.
Because you're the guy about that.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
we have a lot of speakers who listen to our show and a lot of aspiring speakers who
Yeah.
listen to our show.
Yep.
Okay, the first thing I want to ask you about that is, how do people get over the anxiety of speaking? So I don't know if you know this, but
Yeah.
I had a debilitating fear of public speaking.
Not uncommon.
Like, I mean, like, I'd really rather die than speak. Like,
Yeah.
that's where I was.
Yeah.
And so I won't tell the whole story again, but I basically got into a situation where I couldn't say no anymore.
Yeah.
And so my very first speaking event was a keynote in front of 800 people.
Okay.
So, you know,
Jumping in the deep
just
end.
the deep end.
Yeah.
And actually went
She
really
did
well.
great. She crushed it.
It was really fun. And I spent
But she almost died.
yeah, the 6 weeks leading up to it were not fun. They were the opposite of
Yeah.
fun, getting ready. But I don't think that's an uncommon experience. And I
Totally.
had a professional reason that caused me
Yeah.
to have to do it. Well, I'm speaking again. I've spoken since then, of course, but I'm speaking again next month. And it's been a while and I'm feeling a little bit of nerves.
Yeah.
No, it's not debilitating. I'll be
Yeah.
fine. But on the spectrum of I feel anxious to
Yeah.
I would rather die.
Yeah.
Like, what can you tell us?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, I think it's important to acknowledge that those feelings are normal, natural,
Yeah.
and okay.
Mhm.
If anything, I think it means that your body's telling you like, hey, this is important. Like, this is a big deal.
Yeah.
Like, you should pay attention, I'd be more concerned about the people who are just like, I don't feel anything. It's like, well, does this even matter to you? Like, why are
Yeah.
you doing
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
And so you think about
Good
like
point.
big moments in life where you've had something similar, right?
Mhm.
If you had a big job interview or when you were
Your
giving
wedding,
birth,
yeah.
wedding, got
Yep.
engaged, any of those type of like
Mhm.
really big moments, like, oh, I felt similar things. And it
Mhm.
wasn't like when I was proposing to my wife that I thought she's probably going to say no, or this is going to be a disaster. It's just like, no, it's just your body's way of saying like, hey, this is a really big deal. Like,
Yeah.
you better lock in right
Exclamation
now,
mark.
right?
Yeah.
So if anything, I would say like, well, if we know that that's an okay feeling, that's a normal, natural feeling, then what do we do to minimize that or control
Mhm.
that so it doesn't become overwhelming or debilitating? I think one of the best things that any speaker can do is really spend significant time behind the scenes practicing and
Yeah.
preparing.
Mhm.
So by the time you step up there,
Yep.
you know, like, okay, I still feel all of that, but there's also a level of confidence and calm. So
Mhm.
an example would be, if you think back to high school or university or college, and you remember taking a test or an exam, and you have a choice, like if you knew the exam was coming up, you could, I'm just going to wing it. I'm just going to show up and like, we'll just kind of see how this goes. And now I feel really nervous and uncomfortable because I don't really know what I'm getting myself into.
Yep.
Or it's like, no, I'm really going to spend the time to practice, to study, to go over practice exams, to have a study group or whatever it may be, to review
Mhm.
my notes. So by the time I show up, I may still feel some of the butterflies. I know this is a big deal. But there's also a level of confidence, like, no, I got this. Like,
Yep.
bring it on,
Yeah.
let's go. It's similar to like flying a plane.
Mhm.
You don't just get up there and be like, I hope this works.
Let's take the whole family up for my
Yeah,
first
so like
flight.
every time I fly, I still feel like, okay, like this is a big deal. Like, pay attention, But I also feel a level of like, no, like I've
Mm.
spent a lot of time and energy and
Mm.
effort preparing for this moment to take off,
Yeah.
to fly somewhere, to do it safely and effectively and confidently, and land, and it be a good experience. And so same thing is true of going like, when you feel those things, it's okay. It's a
Yeah.
good thing. It's a normal thing.
Yeah.
And also know that like I can spend some time behind the scenes practicing, preparing. So by the time I get up there, it's like, no, I got this. I'm ready.
Yeah. It's so funny. I used to think that people who are good speakers and they seemingly weren't nervous, that they just didn't deal with that. There were like the people like me who had all those feelings
Yeah.
and felt sick to their stomach and, sweaty and whatever. And then you had to wait until that went away to sort of qualify to
Yeah.
get on stage. And what I've realized since then is that, that's just going to happen because it's
Totally.
a big deal. Like, that's just part of it. Now, it won't be debilitating once you'll be fine,
Yeah.
but that's part of it. And you don't have to wait till those feelings go away to do it.
Yeah.
I actually worked with a speaking anxiety coach.
Mhm.
That's how I was like,
That's a thing.
listen, we got to bring in the professionals here. This is a 911. And he said, you know what? You can totally feel all that
Yeah.
and you got to go to work.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, it's like in my mind, it was so black and white that
Yeah.
it had to be either if I was that nervous, I couldn't speak,
Yeah.
or if I was finally not nervous, then I would, whatever.
Yeah.
And it was so freeing to realize, oh, I can just coexist with these feelings. And of course, the truth is they just blow off the back after
Yeah.
a minute or two on stage anyway.
It's so true. I
you
was,
know?
I was going to say, like I'll have all those feelings too. And I've
Yeah.
spoken hundreds and hundreds of times. But when I step on stage, once I get past about the first 15 seconds,
Yep.
Yep.
then I'm totally in it.
But
Yep.
nobody tells
And
you
I'm
that.
loving
Mhm.
it.
So we're telling you right now.
That's right.
Now you know.
You just got to get through those first 30 seconds or
Yeah.
so. But you think about like other professions, industries
Yeah.
where that's the case. If you watch, athletes playing in the Super Bowl and you think, well, they're professional athletes. They've played this game for their entire lives. Of course they're not nervous. Well, no, they're absolutely nervous, right?
Yeah.
Because it's just that moment of they've practiced, they've prepared, they've gone through drills, they've gone through training for years, but it's still a really big moment. I'd be more concerned about like the athlete who's like, no, I feel good. I didn't feel anything. Like, really?
Like,
it's
the Super Bowl, Patrick Mahomes. Come on.
It's kind of cliche at this point, but the whole adage of do it scared is really true, not just in speaking, but in everything.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
And I think that the ability to do it even when you're afraid is the mark of maturity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so I think that whatever it is that life calls on us to do, I think that we've got to step into it. And when we do, assuming we prepare and all that, but when we step into it, those feelings disappear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Dan Sullivan makes this really interesting distinction between courage and confidence. And a lot of people think, well, I've got to feel confident before I can speak. He said, no, confidence comes after you've exercised
reward.
courage.
Yeah.
It's like the reward.
Yeah.
You don't need confidence. What you need is courage,
Right.
which just means the ability to do what's required, even though you have those feelings of anxiety.
Well, I think there's also situations where you can borrow that courage or confidence from other people.
Yes.
So you were talking about like with your coach, of you're feeling like, I can't do this. And your coach is like, no, you're good. And you're like, well, you're not just saying that. So the same thing I think about, like, I hate to keep going back to the flying example, but I'll play along, is that the first time I did a solo flight by myself, I had this young instructor. He's like 20 years old. He looks like a child. And like, and at some point after flying for a few weeks, he's like, okay, you got this. And he gets out of the plane and he says, okay, here's what you're going to do. And you're going to land and I'll see you back here. And you're going like, are you sure? Should we talk about this? Let's do one more practice, But his confidence, his courage is like, okay, he's not going to get out of the plane if he doesn't think I'm confident and ready for this moment. So borrowing that confidence or courage from
good
other
lesson.
people.
And that's why coaching, I think, is so helpful. I mean, I think we all have coaches in our lives. And the reason for that, the reason we're willing to invest in that is because the value of other people believing you can do something and helping you with the preparation for sure. But man, you will do so much more in that context than ever.
If somebody's an aspiring speaker, what would be your advice to get started? Like, there's probably a lot of people, and particularly I think people that are at maybe sort of the mid-career or maybe late career. And they're thinking, I want to do something different. And I'd really like to be a speaker, but they don't even know where to start.
Yeah. One of the things we do inside the Speaker Lab, our training company for speakers, is we teach what we call the SPEAK framework. Basically what this is an acronym for SPEAK, S-P-E-A-K. And so the S is selecting a problem to solve. I think this is the most difficult part of the process for people, is because we just say like, I want to be a speaker. What do I speak about? I don't know. What do you want me to speak about? And who do I speak to? I don't know. I speak to humans. I speak to people. I speak to everybody, right? And so the analogy we always use is you want to be the steakhouse and not the buffet. You want to be the steakhouse and not the buffet. Meaning, if we're going to grab a bite to eat and we're looking for a good steak, like we could go to Golden Corral, where steak is one of 100 things that they offer, and they're all mediocre. Or we could go to a steakhouse where they do one thing, and they just do that one thing really well. So they don't do tacos, they don't do sushi, they don't do spaghetti. Like, we just do steak. And so if you're a vegetarian, if you're looking for something else, like, that's just not us, And so we get it whenever it comes to that. But for some reason, we think whenever it comes to being an expert or a speaker or whatever it may be, or starting a business, I want to solve as many problems as I can for as many people as possible. I want to spread the net as far and wide as possible. And it's counterintuitive, but the more narrow, the more focused you are, the easier it is to actually build some momentum. So that's the hardest part for so many speakers, is we just think through all the different passions and interests and experience and knowledge that we have. And we go, but how do I take all of that and narrow it down to like, no, I can best help you with this. And that, again, we're not making a permanent decision. It can iterate and pivot and change over time, but we've got to pick some starting place versus trying to be, no, we're Golden Corral. So whatever you want us to talk about and whoever you want us to speak to, we can do it. Well, nobody's hiring that kind of speaker.
So does your framework help people to zero in on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's, we've heard the expression before, it's hard to read the label from inside the jar, you know, and also realizing that just because you're passionate about a topic, knowledgeable on a topic, interested in a topic, doesn't necessarily mean that organizations, groups, conferences, events are hiring speakers to talk about that.
Mm.
Yep.
So there has to be some type of overlap here
Like a market
between,
fit.
just because I'm interested in it and this is what organizations hire speakers, like what is that Venn diagram where I know like, okay, here's where I might fit into that mix.
That's helpful.
That's good. And I think this applies to kind of all of life, in the sense that like if you're starting a business,
Right.
the more narrow you can be in terms of
Correct.
the problem you solve, the more successful you're going to be, the faster you're going to get traction. If you're starting a social media account and you're trying to create traction there, the people that are uber successful are the people that take a stand for one thing and people know them for that one thing.
Yeah.
And the more you broaden that, the more difficult it is for people to find you.
Yeah, and we can see this in other elements of life. So let's imagine that God forbid you had, let's use an example. Like you've talked about this a little bit, that you had a heart issue, a few years ago, right?
Yeah.
Now you, with a heart issue, you could go to your normal family medical doctor and they probably know something about the heart, probably more than any of us do. But like they're just kind of a general family doctor, right? I can tell you something, there's only so far I can go. Or you can go to a cardiologist where it's like, if you have a broken leg, I can't really help you. You got a headache, there's nothing I can do for you. You got a bad cough, I'm sorry. But like you got a heart issue, I got you.
Yeah.
This is the thing, and so I'm not looking for a buffet doctor. I'm looking for the specialist who's really, really good at this one thing. And it makes it a lot easier to attract the right type of client or customer, whatever it may be, and repel the wrong ones. Because I know exactly what I'm looking for, and you're exactly the person that can solve that problem.
Yeah.
It seems like when it comes to speaking, and this is what I think people have to consider, there's sort of the art of speaking, creating the content, focusing on the delivery, all the things that make it work on stage. But then there's the business of speaking. Right. So those are two separate things.
Very much so.
Am I missing anything?
No, I think that's exactly right. And I think this is where, again, a lot of speakers make the mistake of, well, I'm just a good speaker. So now I just sit back and I wait for the phone to ring. It just doesn't work like that.
No.
Like your speaking is a great marketing tool, but also there's an element of I have to reach out, I have to follow up, I have to do the hard things that a lot of people just don't want to do. And so people kind of naively assume if I just post something on social media, if I put up my website, if I put up my demo video and I just wait for the phone to ring, if you build it, they will not come. And so speaking is very much a momentum business, like a lot of businesses. And so the more you speak, but you got to do the work to get that flywheel and that momentum going. So a lot of people just assume I just want to be a good speaker and I'm neglecting the business part of it. But I would argue that the business part is as, if not more important than the art of speaking.
And do you help with both of those at Speaker Lab?
Yeah, the majority of what we do is on the business side. But how do you actually find and book a gig? And what do you speak about? How much do you charge? And who hires speakers?
Yeah, that's
and
so helpful.
It's like this mysterious black box because for a lot of people, when you get invited to speak to 800 people, we just assume okay, I guess I just wait for that email to come from me, and I've done some speaking before, and it's just kind of word of mouth or referral or friend of a friend type deal, and that can happen. But if you wanted to do this on a bigger level and do not, a few gigs here and there, but you want to do it as a big part of your business or career, whatever it may be, there are systems, processes to go about that to actually consistently be able to find and book gigs. So that's a core part of what we do.
That's awesome. And, we're big fans here of, just as Dan Sullivan says, find the who, don't try to figure out the how on your own. And I think in this world of professional speaking, you're the who. And it's just such a shortcut and such a hack. You could spend 10 years trying to figure out the business of speaking or waiting for the phone
and
to
get
ring
nowhere.
And get nowhere. Exactly. Right. And you don't have to. So that's really cool.
Yeah. I'm impatient with results. And that's why I hire coaches and why I hire people like Grant to accelerate the process.
Yeah.
And so if you're a speaker and you want to go further, faster, Grant's your guy when it comes to public speaking.
Yeah. We always ask our guests 3 questions.
Yeah.
And so are you game for this?
Fire away.
It's kind of like a lightning round, but the questions are kind of deep. So, the first one is, what is your personal biggest obstacle in getting the double win, winning at work and succeeding at life? Now, not course of your whole life, but right now.
Yeah. Personal biggest win at this moment.
No, biggest obstacle.
Biggest obstacle, right? Yeah. Biggest obstacle. So I would say focus. Because there's a lot
can help you with that.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things we can fully focus on this. There's a lot of things on the menu that you're just I want to do that, or I think I could do that.
Yeah.
My biggest fear is, I know we're all people of faith. And so I don't want to get to the end of the game and be like, you kind of phoned it in, or you went through the motions on some stuff. And we've all been given a certain level of talents. And I really want to do something well. I want to live my life really, really well. Where again, at the end, I know that I steward and manage my life really, really well. And so that means like of all the things that you could do is trying to figure out like how to get those things done and also not miss the most important things, right? I heard from the book Die with Zero, I heard about this concept. They drawn a blank on the author, but he talked about you can make a list of everything you could possibly do in life, and you can do all those things, but you have to get the order right, and you have to get the sequence and right? Meaning that like you may be interested in learning to fly a plane, but maybe now's not the time. You got to do this, and this first.
Right. If you just had a new baby, don't sign up for this.
Totally, right? And so starting a business, moving, whatever, and then also recognizing like there is never a perfect time for any of these things. But so figuring out like the priority and the focus of going like, okay, I want to do all these things, but like here's what I have to do now.
That makes a lot of sense.
That's really good.
How do you know when you've gotten the double win?
I think it's a reflection of the quality of your relationships and the people that matter most. So one thing I talk a lot about with our team internally, I talk about with others, is that who you are is more important than what you do. Who you are is more important than what you do. Meaning, if we are great entrepreneurs, if we're great speakers, if we're great authors, if we're great fill in the blank at the thing that we do, but we drop the ball as husbands, wives, moms, dads, if we're a shell of a human being, we're doing it wrong. And so how I know that I'm winning is the quality of my marriage, the quality of my relationship with my girls, of the people that matter most to me. I can drop the ball in a lot of areas, but I know I'm doing well if the quality of the relationship with them is strong.
That's really good. That's good. Okay, last question. What is one ritual or routine that you rely on to do what you do? You've told us a few, so.
Yeah. All right. Ritual routine. So I'm going to go back to one thing we've kind of touched on a little bit here, and that's rely really heavily on coaches.
Yeah.
I think coaches are incredibly helpful, incredibly valuable when you're able to talk with someone who is a step or two or light years ahead of you in a certain category, whatever that may be, work, personal, whatever it may be, but seeing able to kind of like see around the corner. And so, you know, in many ways, like when we went flying, we talked about work, but I also talked about like, okay, Gail still likes you most days. And so what's that like? What are you doing? You know, and like your girls still seem to get along with you and with each other. So I'm a step or two behind in terms of girls, but like, how do I make sure that they still like me and respect me and we have a good relationship? And so talking with those people who are a step or two ahead of you, learning from them, benefiting from their experiences, their mistakes, their failures, their shortcomings, and like, okay, what are the things that I need to apply in my own world? So really utilizing coaches has been a big thing that I'd highly recommend.
That's fantastic.
Me too. Yeah, I think anytime you're trying to learn something, a coach is just usually the best example to get there faster, as we said before.
Yep.
So good for you. Well, Grant, this has been deep and rich.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us, particularly coming into the studio today.
Yeah.
It's always much more fun in person.
Way more fun. Yeah. This is awesome. Thanks for the opportunity.
And I can't wait to go fly fishing here in a few weeks. That's going to be a fun experience too.
It's going to be great.
Okay, buddy. Thanks.
Thanks for being here.
You bet.
So Megan, that was a fun conversation.
It was so fun.
The time went faster than I thought
I know.
it would.
Yeah.
I looked up and we'd already been
It's
into
like,
it for almost an hour. So what were some of your key takeaways?
Number one, flying in a private plane is a little more dangerous than I've been led to believe because I don't do motorcycles and I won't be doing private planes. So that's my first takeaway. No, I'm just kidding. You know, I think the thing that was amazing about that conversation was just seeing somebody who, frankly, in an industry, in a world that's not really thought to be conducive with a double win, has been very intentional about designing his life so that he can win at work and succeed at life. And I think that's hopeful for everybody because, you know, we hear a lot that I couldn't do it because I'm in, some government
Shift
contract field or whatever. I mean, and certainly shift work might be an area that would make it really difficult. But the truth is, there are creative ways to solve that problem no matter what your context is.
I think similar to that, I think I came away with the sense that he has a deep sense of personal agency.
Yeah.
You know, in other words, he doesn't have to take life as it's been prescribed, but he can rearrange things and create a life he loves. And he's certainly done that. You know, the way that he conducts his life, the way that he's able to spend time with his wife and his daughters. You know, I really admire all that.
I do too.
And I think that that's like a fundamental assumption that you have to have is that you have agency. Not all of us have the same level of agency, but I think it's a fundamental belief that we have to adopt that we've got the ability to design our lives.
Yeah.
We've got the ability, if we have the courage, to make the changes.
Well, part of the reason that we have shifted this podcast to this format is because we want to introduce you to people who are living the double win. Not perfectly, because that's
None of
never
us
going
do
to
that.
happen for any of us, but real people who are living the double win. Because I think if that's not something we had modeled for us, it can seem impossible or it can seem maybe challenging to figure out how we would do it. But when you meet people in different industries or different spheres of life, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, if they could do it, then maybe I could do it. And I think that is powerful. Even though you may not know Grant personally, you get to know him through the podcast conversation. And I think that's powerful. I was leading a conversation with my women business owner mastermind earlier this morning, and we were talking about the value of friendship and a peer group and all of that. And they were talking about how knowing each other had challenged them to grow in ways that they just wouldn't have otherwise, and just how powerful that is. And I think that's one of the great things that Grant brings to people he knows in person, but also people who follow him and follow his work and obviously listening to the show, is being an example that is worth following. And I just love that. We need more of that in our world.
I like that you ask in the question about fear when it comes to public speaking.
Yeah,
Not because it's only applicable to speaking, but it's a metaphor for life.
absolutely.
And I think the single biggest barrier for most of us in terms of getting what we want is fear.
Yep.
And if we can somehow learn how to process fear in a powerful way and get past it, then literally anything's possible. So many things are possible if we would just have that conversation with the person. It's kind of like the first time I asked your mom out, I was scared to death. I was trembling to do that. But boy, am I glad I did it.
Yeah.
Here 48 years later now, we've been married for 46, but 48 years from our first date. And that was amazing. But I had to get past the fear.
Well, you know what I think it is? I don't think you have to get past the fear. I think you have to learn to live with the fear.
Yeah. Or get to walk through it.
To experience fear. Because I think so much of what we don't do in our lives is in an effort to avoid the feeling of fear, because it's not a pleasant feeling. And when you can learn to let yourself experience it and do the thing that you want to do, and that it doesn't have to go away for you to do that thing, I mean, that's freedom.
Well, it's kind of why I also brought up the whole flying thing.
Right.
I mean, I know that, private airplanes are not everybody's jam or most people's jam. I don't have a private plane and don't intend to. But I do think his story about, overcoming the fear of that.
Yes.
Because that would be scary.
It would be very scary.
It was one thing for me to fly with Grant when he was right there next to me. And I knew that if at any point I got in trouble, Grant was there to take over.
Yeah.
But if Grant had landed the plane and said to me, great, now it's your turn, take her up and bring her back. I mean, I would have just been like,
quaking in your boots.
yeah, I wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
I would have bailed.
Yeah. So interesting. Well, hopefully this was as inspiring to you guys as it was to us. And if it was, and we hope it was, we would love for you to leave us a 5-star review. And the reason is not our own vanity on that we love, hearing from you guys. We want more people to experience the double win. In fact, our company's mission is to make it nearly impossible for you not to get the double win. And you got to know about it first. And this is one of the best ways to do that. So leave us a review, subscribe to the podcast, and that'll help us get in front of more people that need the double win.
See you guys next week.